far too much.
Who is Oogie Boogie? Why is he made of bugs? Why is he such a reclusive weirdo? And what is with those dice? So you've just rewatched The Nightmare Before Christmas. Well, you'll find no judgment here. In fact, we're going to recommend you add another film to your cozy movie night watch list. So grab your buttons, bugs, and sewing kits because everything is connected.
I'm really scared, so you're the one everybody's talking about.
In 1993, Tim Burton produced The Nightmare Before Christmas. Budget-wise, it was on the modest end for a Disney film and was considered a sleeper hit in the box office. Still, 30 years later, it holds up as a beloved festive film to pop on over a mug of hot cocoa and some candy corn. In 2009, Laika Studios released Coraline, which several millennials and Gen Zs cite as the most horrifying childhood film they ever watched. It goes without saying that Coraline was a hit, and the film's main antagonist, the other mother, will likely go on to serve as nightmare fuel for new generations of kids for years to come. It would be safe to assume that these were two wonderful, memorable movies from two different decades with absolutely nothing to do with each other beyond their iconic claymation. And we wouldn't blame you for thinking that. But here on the overthinking side of YouTube, we like to do things a little differently. With a little bit of digging and a whole lot of creative thinking, we've come up with a theory that you might just believe in by the end of this video. Oogie Boogie is the other mother's child, or creation, or doll, or whatever word you want to use that's less creepy than that. But the idea stands.
What's that you said about luck? Ragdoll.
We'll start off with the more grounded connections between the two before we dive any deeper. Perhaps the most obvious link of all is that both films were directed by the same guy, Henry Selick. He's directed a few other films, namely 1996 James and the Giant Peach. Now, you might be compelled to say that the fact that Selick directed both movies actually detracts from this theory. Maybe he just drew inspiration from a film he had worked on before. Directors are self-referential all the time. Plus, there's only so many ways you can make a beige cloth creature look in claymation anyway. And sure, if that was the sole basis for this theory, you'd be well within your rights to brush it off, but we have more. Before we can get into that, however, it would be beneficial to get a bit of background on both Oogie Boogie and the other mother. The other mother, or the Beldam, is essentially a shapeshifter that consumes the souls of children. Clearly, she's a creepy character, and though her origins are left entirely mysterious, we at least leave the film with a clear understanding of her goals.
In each of 3 wonders I've made just for you, a ghost's eye is lost in plain sight.
Lure in children, consume their souls. The same cannot be said for Oogie Boogie. We know some stuff about him. He lives in a treehouse, he has 3 children henchmen, he's made of bugs, and he also eats bugs. Though he's described as the film's main antagonist, we don't really get to know why he does what he does, or really what he wants to do at all beyond eating people. Why is he confined to the treehouse? Why does he want to eat people when no one else in Halloween Town seems to? Does eating bugs count as cannibalism? All great questions, none of which were answered by the film. It is, however, stated in a Nightmare Before Christmas video game released on the Game Boy Advance that Oogie wasn't originally from Halloween Town, but that isn't mentioned in the film. We can safely ignore that for the purposes of today's video. Selick didn't just direct Coraline, but he was also in charge of adapting the screenplay.
2, 3! What are you doing?
From Neil Gaiman's 2002 novel of the same name, and he was the production designer on the film. In fact, it's the design of Coraline that may be credited with the emergence of this theory to begin with. In particular, the design of the Coraline doll. In the opening sequence of the film, we watch a pair of spindly, needle-like hands create a doll. The film later reveals the hands to belong to the Beldam. We watch as she takes apart an older doll and reconstructs it to resemble the titular character, but it's not the blue hair or the unintentional visual ASMR of the scene that caught our attention. For a few moments as she guts the doll of its original cotton and refills it with what looks like sand, the doll is a featureless blank slate. Its beige design is bare of any markings, bar the stitching on its sides, the slash of its mouth, and a darkened impression where its eyes would be. Does that description sound familiar? It should. A full 16 years prior, Oogie Boogie had graced the silver screen in the exact same outfit, or lack thereof.
I'm feeling weak. with hunger. One more roll of the dice ought to do it.
I'll bet a little less cuddly looking, the base tenets of Oogie Boogie's designs are extremely similar to the doll. So Oogie Boogie looks like something the other mother could make. Now, you might be compelled to say that the fact that Selleck directed both movies actually detracts from the theory. Maybe he just drew the inspiration from a film he had worked on before. Directors are self-referential all the time. Plus, there's only so many ways you can make a beige cloth character look in a claymation anyway. And sure, if that was the sole basis for this theory, you'd be well within your right to brush it off. But we have more. Before we can get into that, however, it would be beneficial to get a bit of background on both Oogie Boogie and the other mother. The other mother, or the Beldam, is essentially a shapeshifter that consumes the souls of children. Clearly, she's a creepy character, and though her origins are left entirely mysterious, we at least leave the film with a clear understanding of her goals: luring children, consume their souls. The same cannot be said for Oogie Boogie. We know some stuff about him.
What? Snake eyes? Good. 11.
He lives in a treehouse, he has 3 child henchmen, he's made of bugs, and he also eats bugs. Though he's described as the film's main antagonist, we don't really get to know why he does what he does, or really what he wants to do at all beyond eating people. Why is he confined to the treehouse? Why does he want to eat people when no one else in Halloween Town seems to? Does eating bugs count as cannibalism? All great questions, none of which are answered by the film. It is, however, stated in a Nightmare Before Christmas video game released on the Game Boy Advance that Oogie Boogie wasn't originally from Halloween Town, but that isn't mentioned in the film. As frustrating as vague origins can be for those of us who enjoy overanalyzing children's movies, they also provide us with the opportunity to fill in gaps as we see fit, and Oogie Boogie's lack of backstory really lends itself to this pursuit. So, if we're proposing that Oogie Boogie's backstory links him to the Beldam, we first have to provide a motive. Why would the Beldam create Boogie? The Beldam is capable of creating a lot of things, from fantastical gardens to the other inhabitants of her world. These inhabitants range in size and importance, from rats disguised as mice to full-on people like the other father, but they all work to help the Beldam lure Coraline in. The whole world is built around this goal, and the Beldam controls every aspect of it. Well, almost every aspect. Twice, Coraline is saved by another inhabitant. Other Wybie helps her escape the mirror, and the other father gives her the first soul eye. We aren't really given an explanation as to why this happens.
The garden squash need tending, don't you think, Pumpkin?
Both of them are the creations of the Beldam. They shouldn't want to work against her. They shouldn't be able to. One theory is that to create the other inhabitants, the Beldam uses the sand that we see her use in the opening sequence to fill the doll. The sand is imbued with her magic, allowing the other inhabitants to function. However, the mice and the doll remain unerringly loyal to the Beldam throughout the film. So why aren't the other people? It's simple. A person is a lot bigger than a mouse. Making one would require more sand, ergo more magic. This suggests that the amount of magic used to create an inhabitant automatically grants it more sentience and free will. The mice and doll are able to move around freely, which in itself requires some level of sentience, but not that much. The other Wybie needs to be able to interact with Coraline regardless of his inability to speak. The other father needs to do even more than that, singing, dancing, eating, and talking to Coraline for a lot of the time that she spends in the other world. That would require a heck of a lot more magic than a mouse. Oogie Boogie is bigger than both of them. He would require even more filling, more magic to make, therefore it's reasonable to assume that he would have even more free will. But we hear you saying, Oogie Boogie isn't filled with sand, silly, he's made of bugs.
I can't believe my eyes. You're joking me. You gotta be. This can't be the right guy.
The other mother couldn't have made him. Well, let's go back to that opening sequence one more time. In it, we see the other mother deconstruct an older doll. She removes its cotton filling, cotton, not sand. The previous doll presumably had all the abilities of the Coraline doll, so we can reasonably assume that sand isn't the only substance the Beldam can use. Add that to her existing tie to bugs as showcased by the creepy bug room in her arachnid form. We know she's capable of bug magic too. In conclusion, we say that the other mother is the very least capable of making something like Oogie, but we still haven't found a motive. The motive is a surprising, straightforward one. The Beldam created Oogie Boogie as a tool. We know that the other mother wasn't always in the other world, so she would have had to have tested out her powers at some point. Even the greatest artist makes a rough draft, and Oogie could have been just that. He didn't warrant any of the bells and whistles of the later models. He was unfinished with raw fabric and a gash for a mouth, but he did the job. He allowed the Beldam to create life, and in return, she got a loyal tool to do her bidding and keep her company.
Now look what you've done! My bugs! My bugs!
After all, anyone as obsessed with games as the Beldam needed someone to play with. In the film, we see Oogie enjoys the game of chance. In fact, he straight up says that he loves gambling, and there isn't a scene he's in that doesn't feature his pair of dice. This could be an inherited trait. It's possible that Oogie originally filled the role of the doll, being sent into the real world to scope out potential victims. It's likely that during this time, Oogie had the iconic button eyes of the other mother. Through these eyes, the Beldam would have been able to control Oogie, as we see her do with her other creations. The eyes, after all, are the window to the soul. So now we have a method and a motive, but how did Oogie Boogie come to inhabit Halloween Town if he was created in a pocket dimension in Coraline? As we discussed before, the bigger a being, the more magic it takes to make. The more magic involved, the more free will it has. And Oogie is big. He rivals Santa Claus in size, and that man wasn't small by any measure. He would have taken a lot of magic to make, so he would have had a lot of free will. As shown by the other father and other Wybie, Oogie probably went along with the other mother's wishes for a time. However, given his likely use as a doll substitute and game partner, there are a number of ways that he could have been turned against her. The most obvious possibility is that Oogie cheated at a game. We see him do as much when rolling dice to decide Sally and Santa's fate.
Hello, Oogie. Jack, but they said you were dead. You must be double dead.
So we know he's willing to do it. We also know that the Beldam is a really sore loser, like murderously sore. She's definitely fine with killing her own creations too, if what she did to other Wybie is anything to go by. It can be speculated that after kicking the Beldam into a murderous rampage, Oogie made a quick escape back to the real world, ripping out his button eyes in the process to prevent the other mother from keeping an eye on him. From there, we once again have a few options for how he could have gotten to Halloween Town. Firstly, he could have just stumbled across the inhabitants of Halloween Town on the way back to their world after a successful Halloween. It's a possibility, but it's a little too coincidental for us. The more compelling theory is that Oogie, now needing to sustain his magical life force on his own, started eating people. The Beldam gained power from consuming the souls of children. Oogie was now in a world rife with children. After all, the tale of the boogeyman has to come from somewhere, and since Oogie outright calls himself that in the Oogie Boogie song, we can assume that the two are related. Child-eating sack monsters can't really just hang out in public or get a hotel room. He would have stumbled across this gateway at some point, giving his familiarity with the portals to other worlds.
Gosh, I have no idea where your old parents are. Perhaps they've grown bored of you and run away to France.
So, Oogie Boogie is in Halloween Town. What now? Well, he could have continued eating people, and it's theorized he did eat the majority of children in town, which is why he's isolated in his very prison-like base, with his only companions being children named Lock, Shock, and Barrel, who don't seem to ever go near him. He continues to sustain his life by eating the various bugs that are brought to him by his questionably useful henchmen, and occasionally pouncing on the chance to consume something or someone more sustainable, such as his attempt to eat Sally and Santa Claus. It would seem that his fear of Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town, keeps him in check for the most part, but not to the point that he won't opportunistically try to eat people still. It seems that for now, Oogie is content to snack on bugs and terrorize anyone unfortunate enough to come across him. Whether or not Oogie Boogie is truly the creation of the Beldam, it's always fun to connect loose threads between different stories and see if anything matches up. In this case, we think that we've made quite a compelling case for his true origins. Do you think he could have been a button-eyed otherworld inhabitant before his time in Halloween Town? Or is Oogie Boogie just a sad sack of bugs trapped in a treehouse? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and thanks for watching. See ya next time.
Jack! How dare you treat my friends so shamefully!